Welcome to History Photo Archive. These are individuals who committed crimes and were taken off the streets by the Sydney police in the 1920s. Captured directly at the scene, these mugshots reveal much more than ordinary photographs. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's get started. In 1920, Gilbert Burleigh and Joseph Delaney became entangled in a criminal case that highlighted the shadowy world of early 20th century confidence schemes. A photograph from the era initially misidentified their roles. Burleigh, shown on the left, was labeled a hotel barber, while Delaney's portrait bore the accusations of false pretenses and conspiracy. However, a companion image later clarified the truth. Joseph Delaney was the actual hotel barber, a term slang for thieves who infiltrated hotels, boarding houses, or residential lodgings to rob fellow patrons, often under cover of night. Delaney's crimes came to light when he was charged with stealing a cigarette case, a hairbrush, a clock, and assorted clothing from a dwelling house. His modus operandi aligned with the classic hotel barber tactic, blending into transient communities to exploit trust and vanish before suspicions arose. A month after his initial arrest, Delaney faced further charges for being about to abscond from bail, underscoring his reputation as a flight risk. Notably, Delaney's background added layers to his notoriety. Described as both a fireman and a returned soldier, he leveraged his respectable professions to deflect suspicion, a common strategy among post-World War grifters seeking to capitalize on societal goodwill toward veterans. His case exemplified the era's anxieties about demobilized soldiers struggling to reintegrate, some turning to crime amid scarce opportunities. Meanwhile, Gilbert Burleigh's role remains ambiguous. Though initially misidentified as the hotel barber, records suggest he may have been an associate or unwitting bystander. The mislabeling in the photograph underscores the chaotic nature of early criminal reporting, where hearsay and sensationalism often muddied facts. In April 1921, a brazen robbery at the Kensington home of Reginald Catton, a prominent Sydney bookmaker, thrust four men into the spotlight: Hampton Hirscham, Cornelius Joseph Keevil, William Thomas, and James O'Brien. The crime, which unfolded on April 21st, targeted Catton's residence on Todman Avenue, a quiet street in the affluent suburb, and exposed the vulnerabilities of post-war Sydney's emerging underworld. The robbery itself followed a pattern common in the era. Residential thefts often preyed on individuals linked to gambling or cash-heavy trades, such as bookmaking. While specifics of the break-in, for example, forced entry, stolen items, were not detailed in surviving records, the involvement of a quartet suggested coordination. The Crown's case, however, quickly unraveled for one member. William Thomas was cleared of charges, possibly due to insufficient evidence or procedural missteps. The remaining three, Hirscham, Keevil, and O'Brien, were convicted and sentenced to 15 months imprisonment each, a relatively lenient punishment for the time, hinting at either minor stolen goods or a lack of violent intent. The remaining three, Hirscham, Keevil, and O'Brien, were convicted and sentenced to 15 months imprisonment each, a relatively lenient punishment for the time, hinting at either minor stolen goods or a lack of violent intent. On November 22, 1928, a striking police mugshot captured the defiance of Thomas Bede, a figure whose minor act of resistance became an unintentional symbol of pushback against the dehumanizing mechanics of early 20th century law enforcement. The photograph, preserved in archival records, bears a handwritten notation: "This man refused to open his eyes," a detail that transforms an ordinary bureaucratic image into a narrative of quiet rebellion. On July 14, 1921, Frederick Edward Davies became the subject of a degrading police photograph labeled "Frederick Edward Davies, Stealing in Picture Shows in Theaters." That's Surridge, Clark, and Breen. Central 14721, the image, part of an unnumbered special photograph series, was taken in front of the toilet stalls at Sydney's Central Police Station, a deliberate choice reflecting the contempt law enforcement held for petty thieves like Davies. Davies' crime typified the era's sneak thieves, who operated in crowded public spaces such as cinemas, picture shows, and theaters, pilfering valuables from distracted patrons. These offenders were reviled, not only for their deceptiveness, but also for targeting leisure venues symbolic of 1922's urban life. The decision to photograph Davies in front of the station's toilets was a calculated act of humiliation. Unlike formal mugshots taken in controlled settings, this special photograph served as both documentation and punishment, leveraging shame to deter recidivism. Police departments of the era often employed psychological tactics to degrade suspects, particularly those accused of non-violent, but socially despised offenses. For sneak thieves whose crimes were seen as cowardly and underhanded, public degradation reinforced societal scorn. Herbert Ellis emerged as a persistent figure in New South Wales' criminal underworld, his name peppering police records from the 1910s through the 1930s. Though the origins of his surviving photograph remain unclear, his extensive wrapped sheet paints a vivid portrait of a man whose criminal career spanned property crimes, petty offenses, and a gradual decline into desperation. Ellis' early notoriety centered on burglary. He was labeled a housebreaker, shopbreaker, and even a safe breaker, a progression reflecting both ambition and skill in targeting increasingly secure premises. By the 1920s, his activities expanded to include receiving stolen goods, marking him as a versatile operator within illicit networks. A cropped photograph preserved in a 1920 NAS police album captures the shadowy figures of Gracy and Edward Dalton, their identities reduced to a single penciled annotation. Magsman, this archaic term, derived from 19th century criminal slang, referred to confidence tricksters, smooth-talking swindlers who relied on charm and deception to fleece victims. Though the image offers no further details, their classification as magsmen places them within a broader tapestry of interwar grifters who thrived in Sydney's bustling urban landscape. The photograph's inclusion in a police rogues gallery suggests Gracy and Dalton were known to authorities, likely operating in the gray zones of legality. Magsmen typically posed as businessmen, gamblers, or brokers, orchestrating elaborate scams such as fixed card games, fake investments, or counterfeit merchandise schemes. Their success depended on blending into respectable society, a skill that made them both elusive and socially disruptive. In 1920, Eugenia Falleni, a name that would become synonymous with one of Australia's most sensational criminal cases, stood trial for the murder of her wife, Annie Burkett, under the alias Harry Crawford. Falleni's story, however, transcended the crime itself, exposing societal anxieties about gender, identity, and morality in early 20th century Australia. Born in Italy around 1885, Falleni immigrated to Australia and spent much of her adult life living as a man. Adopting the name Harry Crawford, she worked in manual labor jobs typically reserved for men, such as a coal lumper and cook aboard ships, effectively navigating a world hostile to gender nonconformity. In 1913, Falleni married Annie Burkett, a Sydney widow, presenting herself as male. The marriage, which lasted 7 years, unraveled in 1920 when Burkett's charred remains were discovered in scrubland near Lane Cove. The trial ignited a media frenzy, less for the murder itself than for Falleni's gender identity. Newspapers breathlessly dubbed her the man-woman murderer, fixating on her double life as a grotesque aberration. Sensational headlines and courtroom sketches scrutinized her appearance, clothing, and mannerisms, reducing her humanity to a spectacle. Falleni's case laid bare the era's legal and social prejudices. Her 1921 appeal highlighted the court's discomfort with her identity. Judges debated whether her marriage constituted fraud, though it was irrelevant to the murder charge. Released on parole in 1931, Falleni lived quietly until her death in 1938, her later years marked by poverty and obscurity. Guiseppe Fiori, also known by the alias Permontto, was a noted safebreaker whose criminal activities were documented by the New South Wales Police. Although no record of Fiori appears in the NS Police Gazette for the year 1924, his photograph was later included in a supplemental photo collection. This supplement provided further details on his criminal profile, explicitly identifying him as a safebreaker. On March 10, 1922, an inquiry was held in Sydney regarding the passing of Ida Emma Parker, which occurred in Erskineville on February 23rd. George Henry Whitehall, a 40-year-old carpenter, was present in court under police custody. During the proceedings, witnesses testified that Whitehall and Parker had been involved in a dispute prior to the incident. Dr. Palmer, who examined the case, stated that Parker had sustained multiple injuries in quick succession, suggesting a highly emotional state at the time. Whitehall had voluntarily gone to the Newtown police station and reported the incident. Following the inquiry, the coroner determined that Whitehall would stand trial. The trial of George Henry Whitehall concluded the following day. The jury returned a guilty verdict, but noted that the events had taken place under highly distressing circumstances. During his statement, Whitehall maintained that he had been in poor health for some time and that he had difficulty recalling the sequence of events. He mentioned that an argument had taken place, but that his memory afterward was unclear. The case underscored the complexities surrounding the events, with the jury acknowledging the emotional and psychological factors involved. Walter Keogh emerged as a figure of infamy in early 20th century Sydney, with his criminal activities documented in official records and sensationalized by the press. First appearing in the photo supplement to the 1923 New South Wales Police Gazette, February 7, 1923, Keogh was identified as a pickpocket, signaling his early entanglement with the law. By the late 1920s, however, his schemes had escalated in ambition and audacity. In December 1928, the NS Police Gazette once again spotlighted Keogh, now labeling him a suspected person and bogus land salesman. This designation followed his involvement in a sophisticated real estate fraud. As later exposés in the newspaper Truth 1928 revealed, Keogh operated as a go-getter, a term coined to describe con artists who exploited post-war housing demand by swindling aspiring homeowners. Keogh's modus operandi involved selling suburban building blocks at grossly inflated prices, often to working-class buyers. He deceived clients by falsely claiming the land could be resold quickly for substantial profit, leveraging fabricated market trends and high-pressure sales tactics. The mugshot of Ernest James Montague, captured at Sydney's Central Police Station on 29 August 1997, offers a rare glimpse into a man whose story remains largely shrouded in mystery. While specific details of his alleged crimes are unrecorded in surviving documents, the photograph itself, preserved in police archives, serves as a silent testament to his entanglement with New South Wales law enforcement during a volatile era of Sydney's history. West is mentioned in the NUS criminal register as a pickpocket and spieler. The mugshot of Ernest Joseph Coffey, dated 2 June 1922, survives as an enigmatic artifact from Sydney's interwar criminal underworld. While the precise location of his arrest and details of his alleged offenses remain undocumented, the photograph's existence aligns with a pivotal decade in New South Wales policing, a period marked by technological advances in criminal identification and a surge in petty crime amid post-war economic strain. The details surrounding this particular 1924 photograph of Sidney Kelly remain unclear, but his name frequently appeared in newspapers throughout the 1920s, 1930 seconds, and 1940 seconds due to his numerous encounters with the law. Kelly was arrested multiple times and faced charges for various offenses, including assault and firearm-related incidents. By the 1940s, Kelly had established himself as a key figure in Sydney's criminal underworld, particularly in the operation of illegal baccarat gaming. He was known for his sharp appearance, often driving his own motor car and dressing impeccably, traits that set him apart in the circles he moved in. This image was later featured in the photo supplement to the Nuz Police Gazette on July 26, 1926. The caption accompanying the photograph described him as an illicit drug trader who drives his own motor car and dresses well, while associating with known criminals and others involved in the city's underworld. Kelly's notoriety and influence in Sydney's criminal landscape made him one of the most talked-about figures of his time. Harold Price was known as both a thief and an armed offender, frequently operating in Sydney's criminal underworld. This photograph, taken in 1923, captures him following his arrest for a robbery committed under arms at a residence in Randwick, Sydney. Following his trial, Price was convicted and sentenced to 2 years of hard labor. His case was one of many during a period when Sydney law enforcement was intensifying efforts to curb violent crime. Despite his relatively short sentence, figures like Price were emblematic of the challenges authorities faced in maintaining order amid rising criminal activity in the early 20th century. Sidney Grant, better known by his alias, Pretty Sid, was a skilled confidence trickster whose name became well known in the criminal circles of the early 20th century. A photograph of him appeared in the criminal photographs section of the New South Wales Police Gazette on May 2, 1923, with the caption identifying him as a confidence man notes for gold, indicating his involvement in fraudulent schemes that often targeted unsuspecting victims in financial swindles. Grant's reputation extended far beyond Australia. In The Big Con 1940, a seminal study on confidence tricksters by sociologist David Moorer, he is mentioned as one of the masters of a sophisticated con known as the hot seat, a scheme being practiced in Europe at the time. He is listed alongside other notorious swindlers such as Snow E.T., Kangaroo John, Melbourne Murray, Devil's Island Eddie, and Slab B figures whose exploits were well regarded within their profession. During this era, it was common for Australia's most accomplished con artists to expand their operations beyond their home country, seeking new opportunities in Britain, France, and North America. Their skills were often respected by fellow fraudsters, and their ability to adapt to different criminal landscapes made them particularly effective in international circles. Sidney Grant, with his charm and expertise in deception, was among those who thrived in this global network of confidence tricksters. Patrick Riley, also known by the alias Matthew Edward Riley, was convicted in October 1924 for producing counterfeit currency. Authorities charged him not only with manufacturing fake coins, but also with possessing a coining instrument specifically, a mold used to create the fraudulent currency. Following his trial, Riley was sentenced to 2 years of imprisonment with hard labor. Frank Murray, operating under the alias Harry Williams, emerged as a prolific criminal figure in late 1920s Sydney. In March 1929, he was sentenced to 12 months of hard labor for breaking, entering, and stealing, a conviction that underscored his reputation as a skilled housebreaker. By April 30th, 1930, his entry in the New South Wales Criminal Register further detailed his criminal profile, labeling him a habitual thief with a distinct modus operandi. Murray's method typically involved targeting residential properties, exploiting vulnerabilities such as lead light doors, windows, or fan lights, which he forced open during the tenant's absence. His crimes were marked by opportunism and precision, often timed to avoid confrontation. Despite his criminal activities, Murray's demeanor was described as quiet and unassuming, a stark contrast to his high-risk lifestyle. He was known to frequent hotels, wine bars, and the bustling Haymarket district, areas teeming with both potential targets and illicit networks. Notably, he consorted with prostitutes, suggesting TIs to Sydney's underground social circles. In 1919, 22-year-old Esther Eggers became a notable figure in Sydney's criminal records following a violent clash with law enforcement. Charged with malicious injury to property and the grave offense of wounding with intent to do grievous bodily harm. The incident began when police responded to reports of Eggers vandalizing property, a charge likely linked to escalating personal or economic struggles common among working-class Australians during the period. However, the situation escalated dramatically upon her arrest. Confronted by an officer, Eggers, described in court documents as combative and unpredictable, launched a ferocious attack, inflicting severe injuries on the policeman. Eggers' violent outburst resulted in a 12-month prison sentence, a stern punishment reflecting the judiciary's low tolerance for assaults on authority figures. While court records offer limited insight into her background, her age, and the nature of the crimes suggest a life shaped by hardship or instability. On July 30, 1923, William Cahill's stern visage was captured in a mugshot at Sydney's Central Police Station, a stark artifact of his encounter with the law during a decade marked by social flux and evolving policing practices. Though the specifics of Cahill's alleged crimes remain lost to time, the photograph itself offers a window into the procedural rigor of early 20th century law enforcement, as well as the anonymity of countless individuals swept into Sydney's criminal justice system. Sidney Skookerman was documented in the supplement to the Nuz Police Gazette in 1924, where his entry was captioned, "Obtains goods from warehouseman by falsely representing that he is in business." Skookerman was involved in fraudulent activities that targeted warehouse owners and suppliers, deceiving them into providing goods under the false pretense that he was operating a legitimate business. This type of deception was a common tactic among confidence tricksters of the era, allowing them to acquire valuable merchandise without the intention of payment. Emerging in the turbulent aftermath of World War I, Joseph Messenger epitomized the trajectory of a young delinquent evolving into a hardened figure within Sydney's interwar criminal underworld. Born in 1904, Messenger's first documented brush with the law occurred in 1921 at age 17, when he infiltrated an army warehouse, absconding with military-issue boots and overcoats valued at £29.3, a substantial sum equivalent to over $2,500 today. This theft, targeting surplus post-war supplies, hinted at both opportunism and an understanding of resale markets for stolen goods, likely driven by economic desperation in a city grappling with unemployment and returning soldiers competing for scarce jobs. In 1922, Messenger's notoriety grew. Arrested for breaking and entering a dwelling, the charges were mysteriously dropped, possibly due to insufficient evidence or witness intimidation, a recurring challenge for law enforcement in an era of limited forensic tools. Undeterred, he was apprehended months later for stealing a saddle and bridle from Rosebery Racecourse, a venue frequented by affluent patrons, suggesting a strategic shift toward high-value, portable items. William Stanley Moore was a known figure in Sydney's criminal underworld during the 1920s. Identified primarily as an opium dealer, a 1926 entry in the Nuz Police Gazette described him as operating with large quantities of counterfeit opium and cocaine, suggesting his involvement in the distribution of fraudulent or diluted narcotics. Moore worked as a wharf laborer, a position that likely provided him with access to smuggling networks along the waterfront. He was known to associate with waterfront thieves and drug traders, embedding himself in the illicit trade that flourished in Sydney's docks and shipping yards. During this period, authorities were increasingly focused on curbing the illegal drug trade, which had expanded with the rise of international smuggling routes. In December 1924, Walter Smith faced criminal prosecution in New South Wales for 2 separate burglary offenses, as documented in the Nuz Police Gazette, December 24, 1924. The first charge involved breaking and entering the dwelling house of Edward Mulligan and stealing blinds valued at £20, with only a portion of the stolen items recovered. The second charge pertained to stealing clothing worth £26 from the residence of Ernest Leslie Mortimer, though in this instance, all stolen goods were successfully retrieved by authorities. Smith's crimes highlighted a pattern of domestic burglary, targeting household items of significant value. Following his arrest and trial, the court sentenced him to 6 months of hard labor as punishment for these offenses. The details of his case, including the partial recovery of stolen goods in Mulligan's burglary and the full recovery in Mortimer's, underscored the variability in outcomes for such crimes during this period. This case reflects the legal repercussions of property crimes in 1920s Australia, where even partial recovery of stolen goods did not mitigate the severity of sentencing for convicted offenders like Walter Smith. In 1920, 2 individuals, Albert Stewart Warnkin and Adolf Gustavi Beutler, faced criminal charges in New South Wales, Australia, as documented in historical records. Albert Stewart Warnkin was notably listed in the Nuz Police Gazette on November 10, 1920, where he was charged with the serious offense of attempting to carnally know a girl 8 years old. This charge, reflecting the legal language of the era, underscores the gravity of the allegations against him, which would have been classified under crimes against morality or indecent assault in early 20th century legal frameworks. Around the same period, Adolf Gustavi Beutler was implicated in a separate case involving public indecency. His police record includes a photograph inscribed with the phrase, "willful and obscene exposure," indicating charges related to lewd or inappropriate public behavior. Such offenses were typically prosecuted under public nuisance or obscenity laws, which aimed to uphold community standards of decency during that time. In September 1928, a dramatic police operation exposed a hub of illicit activity at 74 Riley Street, a rundown terrace nestled in Sydney's lower Darlinghurst district. The raid, spearheaded by Chief Inspector Bill Mackay, a rising star later appointed police commissioner, resulted in the arrest of 15 individuals, including 4 notable figures: Thomas Craig, Raymond Neal, infamously known as Gaffney the Gunman, William Thompson, and F.W. Wilson. In court records as a known haunt for reputed thieves and underworld associates, had long been under surveillance. Mackay's team stormed the residence following intelligence linking it to stolen goods and coordinated criminal activity. Among those detained, Craig, Neal, Thompson, and Wilson. Raymond Neal, in particular, earned his ominous alias through alleged involvement in armed robberies across New South Wales. Charges brought against the group ranged from illegal possession of firearms and stolen property to vagrancy and conspiracy. Which story surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more.